Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aiman. Good to meet you all here. I visited here one time before, and that's why my computer seems to know your network already. It's logged in automatically. So yeah, I just want to introduce myself a bit before we get into this. My kind of quick journey also as an entrepreneur. You know how I came to pass through all the stages that I guess some of you guys are in also, and maybe some of you are more advanced stage, of course. So I was mainly based in Dubai for the last 5 years, and got into the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And I saw that the ecosystem was a bit kind of fragmented, you know, everybody doing their own thing and this kind of stuff. So me and a few people, we put together a platform called Startup Central. So this is kind of to bring all the entrepreneurs together in one place with the government agencies, the ecosystem players, investors, supporters, all of that, in order to share information and cooperate and this kind of thing. So from there, of course, I happened to meet a lot of founders, attend a lot of events, and also learn a lot about the journey of entrepreneurship. We interviewed lots of founders and featured them and things like that. And then I myself became an entrepreneur. I'm a partner in 6, 7 different projects. Some are apps and some are web platforms and these kind of things. Also been on the investor side a little bit as well, with angel investment networks and things like that. So happened to learn a bit about the ecosystem and how it works. Okay. All right. So basically, the topic of our chat today is preparation for investment. Okay. So this is usually the biggest topic on anybody's mind, is how to, as a startup, of course, as an entrepreneur or a project builder, leader, how do we take the next step and how do we get investment to help us grow to the next level and to help us expand globally and maybe enter new markets and do that. Because honestly, even from my own opinion, some of you might agree or not, but investment is absolutely necessary. There's a lot of things you can do with your own funds or bootstrapping or using family funds or things like that, but getting proper investment is always necessary if you want to really grow and accelerate and take the next step. Because building a product, that's the easy part, okay? Marketing it and getting it out to the market, that's the difficult part, right? And to get to the first 1,000 users or 10,000 users or downloads, or depending on what type of project you have, that's the difficult part. And media is not cheap, advertising is not cheap. Getting the word out there, you are crowded by millions of other people trying to also share the same space and share the same media. So it's always absolutely necessary that you have proper investment, especially at the seed level in the early stage, to get your company to the next stage. After the seed level, I can say it's debatable because you may generate revenue from your project, and then maybe you don't need any more investment. So you don't need to have Series A, Series B, 100 different series, right? At least if you got off the ground and you have enough seed funding or early stage funding, that might give you enough capacity to be able to self-grow the business and keep your costs low and keep yourself efficient, and then maybe you don't need any more investment, right? So the seed stage investment is the most important, but it's also the most difficult, okay? Because that's where the most risk is in the startup before it's proven to generate revenue and this kind of thing. And at least here in the Middle East, in the region where we are, I mean, we're unfortunately we're not in Silicon Valley. This is not exactly the same culture. So they're more risk takers. Even if I've heard people, you can just write an idea on a napkin in a restaurant and somebody can give you a check, right?
That was better school. That was better school.
And other things as well. So, but here, now of course I don't mean just Bahrain, I mean the whole region, Middle East, this is not normally the case. The investors have less appetite for risk, and usually they are more, they want to wait more until they see the model being proven, they want to see some revenue, they want to see big traction. Like let's say if you go to them with an app, they want to see at least 10 or 15,000 downloads before they even start talking to you, right? If you say, oh, we have 500 users and we're testing this, no, we're not going to speak to you. And I've seen that firsthand with all of the apps that I've been in as well. So that's why getting this right, getting this part right is the most important, one of the most critical steps you will pass as an entrepreneur, is how to pass, successfully the early stage investment process, right? And that's why there are some tools that you can use in general, in the whole entrepreneurship journey, that will increase the likelihood of success in this part, okay? Which help you become more confident and more trustworthy to the investor, so that the investor will will look at you more favorably and more seriously and consider the investment better. Okay, so that's why I wanted to tell you about what some of these tools are. Okay, we have some of these tools ourselves on this platform, but they also exist elsewhere on the internet. Okay, we didn't invent any of them here, but the main case is that the preparation process is very important, and it usually consists of things that the entrepreneur doesn't like to do normally and is not specialized in. Because I'm assuming most of entrepreneurs, your main usually your background would be either in something technical or maybe something business related or something like that, and you're focused 100% on building your MVP, building your product, building your project, getting the market, and you don't want to waste time focusing on this kind of stuff, which is financial and legal things, right? So usually these things usually get left out or left to the end because nobody actually enjoys the process of doing that. Okay, and there's many options of how to get some of these things done. Some entrepreneurs would wait until the final stage when they're ready for investment, and then they get, for example, a financial advisory firm or legal advisory firm to prepare their documents, right? Some of them, they try to do it themselves or they download material from the internet. Anyway, it's fine, but as long as you have solid preparation and you have a scientific basis or some kind of objective basis for doing this, because the investor will ask about a lot of these type of questions, okay? So when an investor usually looks at a project, 80% of their decision is based on the team, the entrepreneurs, not the project itself. Okay, the project can be still being developed or in various stages or something like that, but they want to have confidence in the team that the team has a lot of energy, they're trustworthy, they can execute on anything, they can change plans or pivot when needed. Okay, so they're not going to get stuck if they hit a roadblock or they hit the first bump or something like that. So the team is dynamic enough and cohesive enough that they can handle anything, okay, and they can demonstrate that to the investor. Okay, so we can go through a couple of examples here. One is equity distribution. All right, this might actually not come to your mind because usually this is one of the things that doesn't occupy a lot of mental space, for the entrepreneur. Usually it's something that happens kind of matter of fact or kind of obviously. So let's say if there are 4 people here. What's the average team size here, brother? 2, 3?
Yes, I meant 2, 3.
Okay, let's say 3. So let's say there's 3 people, co-founders, who started the project. Okay. Mostly, what we see in the Arab world is that people will say, okay, خلاص, there's 3 of us. We're starting this project. We'll just divide the shares equally, 33% for each person, for example, right? Or they might say, okay, the person who actually brought the idea should get a bit more. So let's say one person gets 40%, the other 2 get 30-30, or something like that, right? Which is fine, but it can be a bit more refined and a bit more accurate than that because investors usually ask about this. Okay, so an investor usually, if you're talking about savvy investors, right? If you're getting a good investor from Silicon Valley or from even from here, but somebody who knows what they're doing, they will ask about this. They'll say, okay, let me see how you divided your equity between the team. Right? Because they want to make sure that there's not going to be any fighting or any kind of problems in the future. So they'll ask, okay, why is this person getting only 10%, this person getting 70%, for example? Okay? So you have to be able to justify that in an objective way, which is based on the relative contribution of the person or the things that they brought to the table. Okay? So usually each co-founder brings something different, right? Somebody maybe can do the coding, somebody can handle marketing and things like that, somebody can do the business side, or maybe somebody actually had some money in their own hands or from family or something, and they put money into the project, right? All of this has a value. Everything that somebody brings has a value, okay? But how do you assess all of these values there, right? So there's a lot of ways to calculate ideal equity distribution. You can obviously choose, any way. We have, for example, one methodology here, okay, where let's say, for example, you enter the number of co-founders. Okay. So basically, this is just a calculator. So here, this is some of the criteria that you should consider in your mind when you are calculating equity distribution, okay? For example, the idea. So usually the idea carries weight. If somebody generates the idea, okay? Idea is not, of course, everything, because implementation is the most important thing, but at least the person should have some kind of reward for coming up with the idea, right? And then business plan. So who wrote the business plan? Who designed it and all of that? Who did the setup of the company and the marketing plan and all of this? It takes a lot of work, and somebody has to get credit for that, right? For example, expertise. This is different types of expertise, right? So you have, for example, the coding, you have the technical stuff, copywriting, financial things, customer research or market research or things like that. So usually in a startup you have these roles. People have performed these roles and they need to get credited for that, right? And then there's also the matter of simple commitment, time commitment. Who's actually taking the most risk? Who actually left their job and is dedicating themselves 100% to this project, right? If somebody's only putting 1 hour a day for the project and when you call them they're not available, then they're not really one of the bigger shareholders, right? And who might have put actual funding into it or something like that. So these things, again, this is just a guideline. This is something that we picked up from Silicon Valley. It exists in other forms as well, okay? And in our version of this tool, you just basically, assign scores for each person based on what they've contributed, and then that's how you get the final result.
How are they weighted?
Hmm?
How is each point weighted?
So there's a weighting algorithm which is
algorithm working behind it.
yeah, there's an algorithm working behind it, which again we did not invent it. This is something that's the standard in Silicon Valley, right? So for example, idea holder automatically gets I think 10% extra. Okay, the business plan creation. I mean each one of these things has a value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's kind of an interplay between them as well, because sometimes they don't exactly add up here. So because maybe 2 people contributed almost equally to something or all that. In the end of the day, it does a mathematical calculation and brings out a value.
So for instance, if only one person worked on the business plan,
Yeah.
then you would give them a 10.
Yes.
And then everything
So for example, in this case, this would be 10.
0, 0.
Okay, 0, 0. And then here, maybe this person had
30,
yeah.
70, whatever.
So yeah, 30, and then this person also 30, and then this one 40 or something like that. So ideally, they should all add up to 10 in each line, right? But if they don't, then still the algorithm can work a way to obviously to adjust the new total of the value, okay? So this is one thing that can help you to do this calculation, right? But in any way that you do it, at least you have something to present to the investor. If an investor comes to you, they usually ask this kind of question because they want to make sure that the fairness has been implemented from the beginning, and that once, hopefully, inshallah, you guys, become big and you make millions of dollars, there's not going to be any contention, any fighting, and all of that. And I'm sure if you saw the movie called The Social Network, which shows the story of Facebook, right? There were a lot of fighting about that, okay? Because they came in the end, and nobody knew how much ownership they had in the company, because it started in a very unstructured way, right? It started in the dorm room, and then there was one rich classmate that they had who actually gave them the first $1,000 just to buy the computer server. So that became his share, and later this became worth like 40% of the company, right? And then later he actually left. This was Eduardo Saverin, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then one person I think contributed something very small, I think $5 or something, but eventually this became worth 10 million or something in Facebook, right? So I mean, these kind of things are important because whether the company actually goes big or even if the company fails, right? Because even if it fails, what you're going to do is you're going to liquidate the company, right? You're going to sell all the assets and all of that, and you still want to make sure everybody gets their right, all right? So this equity distribution thing, keep it in mind. It's very important, whether in case of success or not in case of success. It's still something that you have to consider. Okay. So any questions about this process so far?
And this is obviously for an idea phase, right? Still it's not unestablished, so on and so forth.
No, it can be established, but this should be before you raise any funding. Right, because if you've already raised funding, then it's too late to change that, Yeah. Okay.
In many cases, founders only decide distribution after when they're considering funding, not
Yeah.
before.
So it should be hopefully done earlier than that. I mean, that would be the best practice, right? Okay. So now another thing that you should definitely consider very seriously, which I consider actually the most important tool, is valuation. Okay. I think that's the biggest question usually on people's mind. How much is my company worth? And how can I prove it, right? Because again, anybody can say any number, and the investor can also say any number out of a hat. They don't have to actually, challenge you or anything. They can just pull a number out of their head. So usually, what happens is when you enter the negotiation with an investor, you sit down with the VC and you say, look, we have this app or we have this product, and the traction is so much. We have so many users or something like that, and we think it's worth $1.5 million, for example. Okay. So the investor will ask you, okay, well, how did you reach that number, first of all? And they'll say, okay, you think it's 1.5 million, but my opinion is only 800K. okay, something like that, right? And then the negotiation will start, and if there's no basis for the negotiation, it can go anywhere, right? So you can't control the process when you don't really have any facts in your hand, you know? And actually, getting a fact in your hand is difficult because pre-revenue evaluation is almost impossible. It's like something like philosophy, not science, right? Because if you have revenue, things are easy. You just do a cash flow calculation. I'm sure all of you know that, and you can almost exactly determine what the value of something is. And that's how they usually appraise things like real estate or like existing companies, you know. So you take the revenue of the real estate, for example, you divide it by 10 or 8 or whatever, and that's it, right? But in this case, there's no financial parameters involved, okay? So in pre-revenue evaluation, it's more qualitative metrics that are evaluated here, okay? Things like risks, for example. What are the risks that you're facing in the market? Things like opportunity. So how big is the market size and the opportunity, and what percentage you think you can get from the market, okay? How strong is your team? How strong is your design and your product? Do you have original and unique IP, intellectual property, or not, right? If you're just copying the IP of somebody else, like for example, if you're building, let's say, I don't know what you guys, your projects are doing, so don't take this in any wrong way if I mention an example, but if somebody's building a copy of an existing food delivery app, for example, right? There's a million food delivery apps out there, and unless you have some unique algorithm that knows, for example, how hungry people are or something like that, right? If you invented something new, fine. But if you haven't invented something new, then you don't score anything on the IP value, right? You might score on other things, but this one, it's a risk for you because someone else might copy that, right? So these are the factors that you usually assess when you come to pre-revenue evaluation. Strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, things like that. It's almost like a SWOT analysis, right? There's no science behind it anyway. Even if I show you here one of the tools that we have, for example, it's not scientific, okay? It's a lot of subjective judgment as well, but at least it gives you an advantage in negotiating with the investor. So the investor can't just come and say, oh, you think this is 2 million, we'll give you only $500,000, right? Because you have some values, and they have to then challenge your values one by one, and they have to produce a number, right? So they can't just throw it out of their head, right? So here, for example, in our valuation tool, okay, we've actually collected 5 different models that are used in Silicon Valley, okay, for pre-revenue evaluation. They're a bit complex, and of course, there's a lot of mathematical modeling and Excel sheet behind this that you don't see because we made the interface very simple. But these are the kind of things that you should try to assess and you should keep in your mind when you're doing the exercise, right? So for example, this one, RSM, it's risk assessment method, okay? So here, you're only assessing risks, nothing else, right? So you start with an average value. This is a comparator value, okay? So let's say another app similar to yours or another product in the market has a valuation that you know, okay? So you can start with that number, okay? And then you compare yourself to them on what risks you have and things like that compared to that other company that you have in your mind, okay? So this is it could be one of the ways, for example, that Kareem did their valuation compared to Uber or something like that, right? So when you know that there's somebody else who exists in the market, you can use that as a comparison for yourself.
Well, I mean, like, what if your competitor is, what if there's only like one competitor, right? And they're very, very, very large, and the reason why they have such a high valuation is because of the partnerships and the agreements that they've gone through them. And there's a lot of value in that, and there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to get all of these.
True, but this is in the same stage. The number that you put here is the number that company was in the same stage as you. Not now. Okay. So you have to do some research in the internet. Okay, let's say if we're talking about Uber, for example, you have to do some research 5 years ago when Uber first started, before they raised any money, before they made any partnerships. What was the valuation they started with when they raised investment, right? So it has to be compared to the stage. You see? Yeah. So here, okay, so you put the risks here. What's, for example, the risk of legal risk, competition risk, funding risk, whatever, all of that. And 0 is the kind of the average, and then you can put plus or minus on that, okay? So that's kind of how this one works.
So for instance, in this case, right, if you were going to do it,
shows you with that. Yeah.
So if you were going to do it with Kareem, right?
Yeah.
Kareem and Uber.
Yeah.
Competition risk is going to be actually higher.
Yeah.
Than before, because before Uber there wasn't any competition, but now since you're coming into a market where Uber already exists, then that means there is a higher competition risk.
In here,
But then at
Yeah.
the same time, litigation risk might be less because
Mhm.
they've already gone through the litigation
Exactly.
hurdles and they've gotten the laws passed to allow these
Exactly.
types of apps to work.
Exactly. That's here in Bahrain, for example. But like, for example, in Pakistan, Kareem is alone. Okay, so Uber does not exist in Pakistan yet.
The
So
founder is Pakistani, I believe.
yeah, he's originally Pakistani. Yeah. So because of that, Kareem would have an advantage in Pakistan, for example, and maybe a disadvantage in here or Saudi Arabia. Litigation, again, it changes every day because Uber, although it's been operating now for what, 6-7 years,
It's kicked out of London.
they just got kicked out of London. They got kicked out of Spain. They got kicked out of Paris.
Cash flow negative as well.
Yeah, so every day it changes. The legal environment changes. Even San Francisco, their hometown, at some point they were banned from there. Right, so you can. I mean, this is something exercise that you have to keep doing it every 6 months or every few months just to assess the new factors, right? Okay, so this one here, this is a bit more complex. It's called the scorecard method. So this one, it's more of a positive attribute, not a negative one. So it's more about strengths and not risks. Okay, so here again, you start with a comparator value, and then you decide what factors are most important to your type of business and you give them a weight. So you actually decide the weight here, okay? Because some factors could be important in your type of business and some of them are not, right? So for example, product or technology, in this, for example, this case study that we did, it was very important, okay? But competitive environment, it was less important, so it was -1 here. Right? And that just depends on the nature of your product, right? If you're operating in a very competitive space, that's one thing. If you're launching kind of a, I don't know, artificial intelligence platform or, a rocket ship to space or something, you might have less competition, right? Need for additional investment, partnerships, all that. And each one of these is actually explained. It tells you what factors to actually assess and how do you assess, because it's really hard to assess this in your mind, right? You're going to probably need to do some internet research as well, not just depend on the tool, but you just have to understand the mechanics of valuation in general and what things investors actually value. Look at case studies from the past, from past investors and things like that. So here, again, it just tells you, it gives you some guidance on like how to make something strong or weak or whatever, all of that, okay? Yeah, okay. So again, this is one method that people use for valuation. The reason why we put here multiple methods is because we have a chance to give you the average value of all of these 5 different methods, and you can choose to rely on which one you want. You don't actually have to fill all of them out, okay? Because in some types of business, some of them are not relevant or not applicable to your type of business. This requires a lot of background knowledge as well, and a bit of research. But still, it's easier for you and better for you to do it yourself using some kind of online tool than to give it to a financial company to do it, because they don't understand your business as much as you do. Okay? So if you go to any financial advisor or auditor or something like that and say, okay, we want to have a valuation for this business, the first question they'll ask you is, okay, give me all your financial documents. Okay, we don't have any financial documents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Give me how much revenue do you expect to make in the next year? We don't know, right? So right? So I mean, although this is complicated, but I think it's still better to use this than to do it the other way, because in your stage, usually you're not ready to do it in any other way, right? So here is also something called the Burkus method, okay? And there's 2 different variations of that. So basically, have you heard of Burkus method?
Is it like the discounted cash flow method, but with projections or something like that?
No, it's a little bit different.
I do.
You heard of it?
Yeah, but I don't remember.
Okay.
much about
So
it.
just as a quick refresher, this is a name of a professor in Stanford. His name is Burkus, and he invented this valuation method to be the most simple one, which is based on the fact that any pre-revenue valuation, if you have not made revenue yet, your maximum value ever can be only $2.5 million. Right? Until you make revenue, of course, right? But in the pre-revenue stage, any startup in the world, anywhere in the world, can have a maximum value of $2.5 million, right? And this 2.5 million is divided into 5 sections of $500,000 each, as you can see here. 0 to 500, 0 to 500, 0 to 500, right? And this is how you actually reach the total number, by adjusting the slider to a certain value. Okay? And how do you do that? Again, very simple. Management team, idea, prototype, board of directors, and sales. 5 criteria. So his method is actually the simplest method available, but it's maybe not the most accurate on its own. You might need to use other methods as well. But this is one thing that's just quick, 5 minutes, you can do it in 5 minutes. And there's, I think, other tools online also that do the same thing, right? So let's say, for example, if you're again, this is a self-assessment, so you have to be as accurate as you can about yourself, because when it says quality of the management team, everybody maybe thinks that we have the best quality, right? But you have to be objective about that. Am I really top class, Silicon Valley standard, best management team in the world? Maybe, maybe not. If it's not, you can put it somewhere in the middle here, right? How about my idea? Do I have a really good idea? Is it something that nobody's done before? Is it something that has a huge market? It's a painkiller for people, so you can put a high value there. How about the prototype? My prototype is not ready yet, I'm still working on it, this kind of thing, right? Do I have a good board of directors? And board of directors is equally important to the management team, because board of directors is the one that opens the connections for you, okay? So that's one thing also I wanted to stress here, is that don't forget about getting a board of directors or board of advisors for your startup. That's one thing that's extremely, extremely important. Have you guys heard of, for example, of Magnet?
Yes.
You heard of Magnet?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. So Magnet is one, big kind of famous startup in the UAE, and I think the biggest thing that helped them is having a board of directors. They had directors from Wanda and from Biko Capital and from all of that sitting on their board. Okay. So when you have guys like that sitting on your board, they're going to do everything possible to open doors for you and to act in your interest, right? They have skin in the game. They have they're a stakeholder. Because when you're a board member or a director, you obviously have some shares or something like that, right? So very, very important thing not to be forgotten, okay? So again, this is how this one adds up. And then finally, this one is the normal kind of cash flow method, or the ROI method. So you put a certain number and you say, okay, this is the expected return on investment that I should offer you, 20%, 15%, whatever, and how much dilution and all of that, and then that's it. So in this example, because we already did this case study, I can actually show you what the result looks like. So it'll come something like this, okay? So you get we only did 4, so you get 4 different valuation results, and the average value, this one, which is about 1.6 million, okay? So this is something that you can at least show to the investor. When you print this and you show this to the investor, you can say, look, I've actually take the effort, and I sat there for 6 hours or whatever, and I did all of these different valuation methods, and this is my projected valuation, okay? In that case, there's no way the investor can say, I'll give you half of that, okay? They can negotiate a little bit. They'll say, okay, 1.6, 1.5, or whatever, something like that. But they can never say, oh, it's only $500,000, because they can see the values in front of them. I mean, every tool that you've used is actually over $1 million almost, okay? So there's no way that the valuation can be mathematically lower than that. So now you've given yourself an advantage to speak to the investor and to have confidence, and they can actually go back with you and look at the values. So sometimes they'll say, okay, show me, how did you get this big number? You can see here, this is how I did it. So then the investor can actually adjust this. They'll say, strength of management team, I don't think so. Maybe I'll make this a little bit less. You guys have a good technology, I'll make this a bit higher. That kind of thing, right? So this opens the negotiation process between you and them. And once you reach the final agreement on everything, then that becomes the official thing, right? So this is a way to ensure a bit of Is it working? Or? Oh. A way to ensure a bit of fairness in the process is that neither you are dictating something to the investor or the investor dictating something to you. This should be an agreement process based on objective criteria, because later, if other investors come in the future and the startup becomes big, and maybe you have an IPO, maybe you sell the company, all of this is in your record. And somebody's going to ask, why did this happen back 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? How was this done? Who signed off on this? Who read this kind of thing and all of that, right? So all these things, you should keep it in your record. Always anticipate for success, right? What happens if you become a $1 billion company? People will fight, right? Whenever there's money on the table, people will start fighting. Maybe now there's no fighting, right? Because there's nothing really there. But in the future, it could happen. Like it happened with Facebook, like it happened with Twitter. It happened with all the big companies, right? Even Uber, now the CEO got kicked out. It happens everywhere. Silicon Valley, the most advanced countries in the world, it happens, right? So you just have to be prepared that you did everything as carefully as possible, so that when any event happens in the future, you have your documentation. This is how our company started. This is how we divided equity. This is how we value ourselves. This is how we did all these exercises. We never cheated any investors. We never hid any facts. We never, all this kind of stuff, right? So that's the kind of the best practice in that area. All right. So any comments so far on valuation or any of this?
Not necessarily. It's just that I'm trying to think, because I've sat in front of so many investors.
Okay.
I think if I supply them with this, they're probably going to look at me and be like, saying, just we're the people that are going to give you money, so we're going to do the valuation process, no matter what.
Okay, but that means they're not a very friendly investor. If they
Well, that's what we'd like to be. But technically, they could be friendly. But it's this region. I think it's a cultural thing more than anything else.
True. But see, that's also how you can see whether an investor is right for you or not. Because you don't want an investor who's going to give you money and then boss you around and take control of you and all that stuff, right? And that's something that my partner, my co-founder for this project, his name is Omar, which you know him. He's very outspoken, right? So usually a famous word that he uses in his conferences is that some of the VCs here are raping the startups, right? And that's something that we don't want to happen because, this is not global standard. If we want our region to ever become, a global hub for startups, we have to each play our part to educate the other side on that, right? So if an investor is not acting properly, we hope to educate them, and if a startup is not acting properly, we hope to educate them as well. Because there's a lot of startups also they're not behaving, properly. They're either overvaluing their companies or they're overconfident on what they have, and they push the investors around and things like that. So it shouldn't be from any side, right? Yeah. And that's why also we have, for example, here, we're not going to go through this, it's too lengthy, but we have a term sheet creator here where, again, you have to understand your legal rights when you're negotiating with an investor. You have to read all legal documents properly, okay? We have, like, for example, a glossary here. So this defines all of the funny legal terms and jargon that you might find in a legal here. Okay, so you can look up any legal term and understand what it means, especially if your first language is not English. Okay, and make sure it's a fair deal for everyone. Okay, even try to be more fair to your investor if you can. Don't let them, take control of you, but at the same time, just try to be giving and try to be nice and expect the same from them as well. If they're not treating you the same way, they might not be right for you. Because even if you need the money desperately right now, you take their money, you're not going to sleep at night. Right? They're going to call you every day, what have you done with our money and what's happening and whatever and all that, right? So unless you're comfortable dealing with these people, you're always going to have a problem with that. Okay? Any more comments or anything like that before we... Okay. So one other piece of documentation that you should always also make ready is due diligence. Okay? Because that is, again, one thing that shows a lot of professionalism and it shows preparation. Okay? And this, for example, maybe you shouldn't use this actual tool because this is very, very detailed. We have one of the most comprehensive and detailed checklists, I think, on the internet. But I think for you guys, it could be something more simple than that. But at least you should look at due diligence and see which, what things are relevant for you to... The signal keeps breaking up.
Yeah, I don't know. This is an issue.
Okay. But anyway, I mean, you can see this later. But so basically, it'll come back.
This is why I told you when I have it on my laptop, for instance, for some reason it doesn't have any issues. But there we go.
All right. So what due diligence simply means is that make sure that everything that you do in the company is documented and it's following the best practice as much as you can. Nothing is perfect. Like when you're in a new startup, you're always going to have to cut some corners and things like that, and just make things happen quickly, right? But at the same time, just make sure you're documenting things because all of this stuff again gets checked in the future. If an investor comes to either invest in your company or maybe a potential buyer comes to buy your company, they want to make sure that everything that you say is actually true and is documented somewhere. Okay, and that every board meeting that you have as a startup, the directors meeting, the CEO's comments or notes, things like that. The coding, your code, you have to own your source code. You have to keep it somewhere if you're doing a technical project. Make sure that the code has been reviewed and checked, without bugs and all of that kind of stuff. Any financial agreements, any partnership agreements, if you've entered in any partnership with someone, let's say someone is going to help you to get business and you offered them commission, right? In the beginning, startups do all kinds of stuff. I mean, when you're a young startup, you're almost ready to sign a deal with the devil, right? Just to bring you some business and money and to grow. But make sure if you sign that deal, keep it at least. Because if somebody buys your company, they just need to know what you owe in the market. Okay? Somebody comes and makes a claim later on, you owe royalties, you owe IP, you owe something like that, it has to be there, right? And a company becomes a lot more trustworthy once they have that. I'm sure you've heard in the news, there was a lot of recent cases of scandals that happened in Silicon Valley because of bad due diligence. Okay, so there was one famous company, I forgot that actual name, but I think they do blood testing. and they you heard of that? Yeah.
100%.
I think they identify certain diseases in your genetics or something like that with a simple blood test, like a finger test or something like that. And they made really big claims. You know, we can identify so many diseases, and this is how accurate it is, and this is, you know, how much success rate and all of that. And then I think a company came to buy. Oh, no, close one. Okay. So somebody came to buy that company, and then it turns out that they were lying about most of this. The testing system doesn't work, right? And it doesn't identify most of these things they said, okay? And there was really no good trail of documentation to show, you know, how this really is, right? So a lot of people paid the price for that because actually the deal already happened, and then later they discovered that they bought a bad deal.
Fake,
Yeah, kind of a fake. I mean, it's not obviously entirely fake, but let's say 50% maybe accuracy or something like that, right? Which is still bad. If you paid $20 million for a company and it only works half of the time, that means you lost half your money, basically, something like that, right? So here, again, as I said, this is a very, very detailed document. It shows you some of the things that you should be collecting, like financing arrangements, debts, securities, customer agreements, distribution agreements, affiliations, whatever, all that. Many of this might not be applicable to you, which is fine. But at least even 5 or 6 of these things, if you have them, okay, like if you have a cap table, for example, if you have any accounting books, right, or any press releases that you've made, shareholder minutes, if you met with your board and you took some minutes, right, resolutions, all of that, these things, keep them. The investor will want to eventually look at them, okay, and if you have them already prepared in advance, you will save the investor so much time and they will like you a lot more, right, because they don't have to actually go digging behind your back and they don't have to go calling and asking references and stuff like that. You come to them and you say, look, here's all my documents. I have a valuation exercise done. I have due diligence materials. I have my equity statements. I have my cap table, whatever, all that stuff. So we show that to them, and yeah.
And hopefully it works.
Yeah, exactly.
No, you're right. So,
but the confidence increases 100 times when they see these kind of things.
it looks a bit more professional, yes.
Yeah.
In that respect, yes.
Exactly. So, any more questions, comments, thoughts?
Actually, I have one on the first part. I want to talk about the equities between the.
Okay. Let's go back in.
If you have any, as an investor, any tool or how do you measure that this structure is healthy for investment or not?
The startup is what, sorry?
Is healthy or ready for investment? I mean, is the equity for me, for my example, my equity is 40% and the rest will be the rest of the team.
Okay. Okay.
This is a sign that it's a healthy or not a healthy structure.
Okay. I think there's no sign of healthy or not healthy in this case. I think it's just the reason. They need to know the reason why. So if you have 40%, you should have a reason for that. Okay? So if you've done the exercise properly, and you can show them, for example, okay, let's say this is you, okay? And you brought the idea, and you wrote the business plan, and you did the design, and you did whatever, all that, then of course you deserve, you deserve 40% or even 60%, right?
And they can live with this, no problem.
Yeah, there's no problem. But as long as there's a reason for that.
Okay.
It's not because you bullied your team to get more equity, for example, right? Or you know. So you have to have a kind of a reason that you show the investor, this is why I have 60% or 90%, right? It doesn't matter what percent it is, but you just have to have a good reason for it. Okay? You can't go to the investor and say, oh, these guys, they don't know anything, that's why I took all the equity and I gave them nothing, right? So, right? So at least there's a good reason for it. And this, again, one example that came out of this probably is from Apple, from the early days of Apple with Steve Jobs. Okay? If you, did you guys see the movie about Steve Jobs?
Yeah.
The first one?
Yeah. The Ashton Kutcher one, you mean?
Yeah, the Ashton Kutcher one, yeah. So it shows you how his co-founders, remember when they were working in his garage, they built the computer together, right? So it was Steve Jobs and then Wozniak, but there was also a couple of other guys. And then eventually when he set up the company and the investor asked him, he said, oh, these other guys, they get nothing. There was a scene about that. So at the end, it was only him and Wozniak who got equity, and everybody else got nothing, right? Why? See, I don't think he did it in the right way, actually, in this case. So they were showing you that Steve Jobs in the beginning was a bit, it was a bit bullish, right? So he did things just out of his mind. There was really no reason why he would cut off his friends completely like that. I mean, he could have given 2%, 5%, something, right? But there was no mathematical way to show why he did it. Okay, so at least if you have something to show for that, you can say, okay, well, this guy, he's not, he wasn't a good team player. He didn't, create any viable value. Didn't contribute. That's fine. If you have a good reason for it, that's fine. But at least you should show the reason. So that's really the main point here. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Anything else?
Okay.
All right. Okay. So yeah, I mean, how many of you are ready to are going to be raising investment soon or pitching?
So we raised pre-seed. We're going to seed right now. So
Raised it from what? Angel, VC, or private?
What? So it's a VC thing.
Oh, it's a VC.
Yeah.
So your valuation is already done and everything.
The initial valuation, but now the new valuation, we're still working on it. I used a tool called Equidam in the Equicity. Obviously, it completely overvalued tremendously.
Okay.
Completely venture capital. Like it valued me at like 30 million. I'm like, no, it's too early to be 30 million. So we went through a conservative model. We tried to do it ourselves. I have some investment banking background, and still a bit high.
Okay.
So
maybe try some of this. This one is a bit more realistic.
It might actually go.
Yeah, usually
I wanted to try it.
more than 4 million.
I wanted to try it, like I said, but I always enter the landing page for some weird reason. I couldn't get access to this.
Okay. There's okay. I'll send you all guys the link. There's a link that goes directly to this, which is called it's eleva8tor.com/resources.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Yeah. So here.
But we're working on a series. I mean, you're working on funding. Everyone is working on
So
funding right now.
the link that you see here at the top.
Yeah.
That's where you can go. Yeah. So you were saying something about that funding?
Yeah, we are raising funds. Hopefully, in the next month, we're starting to do that. We have already raised from 10 more and 500 startups in Silicon Valley.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so we've been part of the Silicon Valley. We've been in Silicon Valley as well. So now we're combining all of that experience plus the experience, the business experience that we got, the successes, the failures, all of them together, and now we're launching the full and final products and trying to raise funds in order to do
And
that.
what kind of product is it?
It is something similar to Netflix, not a copy of Netflix.
Okay.
We just say Netflix to simplify it to people. So we've been producing original content for the past 7 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we
It's a
specialize.
media company as well.
Yeah, it is. It is 50-50, technology and media.
Mhm.
So we've been producing movies for the past 7 years, very successful movies.
Arabic movies?
They are international movies, but from our region, like movies of the fastest car in history,
Oh.
as an example. Because what we see is there are amazing stuff happening here in the Middle East, but it's not shown on our media. Plus, we also live stream championships, like motorsport championships, sporting championships, events, live events, music events. So yeah, that's what we do basically.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else raise funds or really?
So we are the same.
Same
You
thing.
guys are the same team?
Yes, we're the same team.
So what was your product?
We classify ourselves as the best deal search engine. So what we do is we curate a lot of data online and repackage it in a way to make shopping faster and easier for online shoppers. We tackle the issue of spending a lot of time while shopping online. You're talking about an hour spent a day on average. Well, for a customer that knows what he wants, we decrease it to 15 minutes. The way that we do it, basically.
Okay, very good. Are you in the same team?
Yeah.
No, she's in a different team. We are in the same team.
Okay, so what's your product?
Our idea is time control technology. We are replacing the fingerprints and RFID cards. Just when you enter a place, it will be geofence, and you can calculate the signal for the employee having his ID card, and you can track him real time. Yeah.
So it's hardware as well.
Sorry.
You're doing hardware and software.
We try to integrate the hardware and software, but basically for now, because we are just no funding yet, we are using the things that are available in the markets.
Okay.
But in future plan, we trying to build our hardware. Yeah.
Okay. Great. All right. Any yours?
Aiman, we are building AI portal for travel communication.
Okay. Very good.
We are offering business solution for the travel agencies itself, trying to switch them to be online travel agencies.
Okay.
And currently we are developing artificial intelligence machine. It will act like assistant, digital travel assistant. It's going to be during the trips.
Okay. Great. So you guys are ready for the demo day, or?
Absolutely.
I'm working on.
I'm ready.
80%, yes.
80%. Yes.
Still working on the 20%.
Great. Well, usually that final 20% is the most difficult.
Exactly.
Okay. Great. One last thing I can recommend for you here is also in terms of pitching.
Yeah.
So here we just have some samples of pitch books from some of the best companies, there. So if you like to look at samples, maybe just for inspiration, to see how they made their pitches in the early days. Okay. So for example here. So this is the Series B pitch from 2004. I think it takes some time, I guess, to load. So you'll see the slides and you'll see the notes of the presenter at that time. So what kind of details you should keep into the presentation and what kind you should keep out. And usually the shorter the better. So this is the case study on, for example, LinkedIn. Okay. Yeah. So here they're showing comparators, for example, things like that. The growth chart. Again, this is very ugly looking actually chart, but they got a lot of money from that somehow. But that's
No, it's not the charts that got them the money. It's attraction that got them.
This is the market comparison chart, for example. And always people put themselves in the top here, right? Right. And of course the team and whatever, all this things like that. Anyway, so there's some samples here if you're looking for some inspiration just to fix things up a little bit more. Okay. Great. Okay. So I guess thanks for your time and attention.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Thank you very much.
And I hope to see you and I'll coming back inshallah for a demo day.
Absolutely. Inshallah. We'll do
And,
it.
if you need anything else between now and then, please let us know.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks, Aiman. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.